Let's do what we promised we were going to do, and that is we're going to take a look at we're going to take a look at each conference in college football. We're going to go through it in a fast-paced manner. We promise it's not going to be like the preseason, but that was the preseason. And let's start first of all on the SEC. And of course, you still have Georgia at the top and Alabama at the top, so no big surprises there. And I don't think we're going to change our minds either as far as Georgia, Alabama in the championship game. Tennessee has the big game coming up. We'll talk about that a little bit later on with Alabama. Mississippi is the only other undefeated team besides Tennessee in the SEC. So if give me a team in there. Are there any teams right now? If you had to pick a team right now, other than Georgia or Alabama, to win the SEC, who would it be?
Well, obviously, we're gonna throw the chalk or the obvious out, and it's gonna be difficult to overcome that. But you certainly have to look at Tennessee. Okay, undefeated going into Alabama. If they upend Alabama this weekend, we're talking about them. We're not talking about Alabama. So, right now, don't tell Tennessee they don't have a chance. They feel they have more than a puncher's chance. So they have to be thrown into the conversation and into the mention here. There's also another team I think. Number one is playing some sneaky good football right now, and I think they're extremely well coached, and that's Mississippi State.
Yeah.
Mike Leach might be onto something there. Will Rogers, as quarterback, is really, really a good general leader for that football program there. And we're going to find out a lot about them this week when they go to Kentucky, because the winner of that game can put themselves into contention to be playing for the South in a Southeast Conference championship game.
Well, if they can beat Kentucky and they're favored to win. I actually have Kentucky in that game, but if they beat Kentucky, they go into the Alabama game next week with just one loss in the SEC and a chance to control their own destiny.
What more can a coach ask for? A chance to control his own destiny. That's exactly what every coach lives for.
Yep.
You just hope they don't get caught looking ahead this week past Kentucky to Alabama.
Yeah, that's true.
Mike Leach has got I'm sure he's got a speech for that in the locker room as well. He's never shy for words and never shy for being able to get his football team up. So I think it's going to be a great gauge game this weekend, Kentucky and Mississippi State.
Disappointments? Maybe I think I'm a little bit disappointed in Arkansas's defense. I think it let them down. I think they got a tough break in the loss against Texas A&M, and they haven't won since. Psychologically, you could see how much it hurt them on the sidelines when they lost the game, and maybe they just to not be able to upset Alabama when Bryce Young got hurt. They had it there for the taking. They had come back. They were within a touchdown, and then they let the backup quarterback rush for a 65-yard touchdown on 3rd and 15. That was another bone crusher. So they've had some issues on defense, but KJ Jefferson is one of those quarterbacks that you want to get something out of that before he leaves. He's back, by the way, this week against BYU. And on the flip side, Missouri, even though they haven't won yet in the SEC, they have impressed me, and they're headed in the right direction. But like we said last week, they have to start winning some football games.
Well, Drinkwitz is going to need to win to stay around, but for sure, that's a very, very tough conference to do that in. And he does recruit well. He does a nice job, and I think he's a very good coach. It's just a question of whether he can surface inside this conference here. The team that disappoints me the most, and you might think this is a little bit odd, is Texas A&M.
Yeah.
A lot of people had projected them to be this, to be the sleeper of this conference here and to knock teams off.
Yeah.
You go inside. Excuse me, let me put my glasses on and read this to you. This is really kind of unique. Texas A&M. They've played 6 games this year, Greg. They've out-yarded one opponent. Okay.
Was that did they play an FCS team? Maybe.
I'm not sure.
I'll have to check.
Yeah, check that and see. Okay,
Yeah.
One stat win this football season here. You can't continue to keep doing that and expect to win games in the Southeast Conference. You're going to be blown away and swept away sooner or later. Did they have that FCS opponent?
Yes.
They did?
Week 1. Yeah.
Well, there you go. So it's most likely 0-5 against FBS teams.
Yeah.
There's Jimbo Fisher for you. So put him down as my most disappointing team.
And their recruiting is still going to be top notch for next year. So we'll see. But they got quarterback problems too. They're not playing anybody this week, but they do have some quarterback issues as far as staying healthy. And I think Brian Kelly, so far, I think they've done a nice job. I don't know what happened last week. I don't think anybody knows what happened last week in the Tennessee LSU game. That was just a crazy outcome.
Well,
Not that Tennessee won, but in the manner in which they won.
well, it was that trigger effect for LSU. They gambled early, they lost, put them in a hole. They got the ball back. They gambled again. They lost to put them in a double hole. They never got out of it. So,
Yeah.
it was a couple of bonehead decisions by Chip Kelly. And I think he'd be the first to admit that, going for fourth down in your own territory, crap like that. That really.
Yeah, what is he, an NFL coach?
Well, he thinks he is. Okay.
Yeah.
But, it's head scratching to say the least because nobody expected that result last week.
Big Ten and Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, still all undefeated. So not too surprised at this early stage of the season. And that's in the East. In the West, a big surprise. And this is not a surprise to me because we talked about this in the preseason. I felt this was going to be a wide open race, and it's exactly wide open. Heck, Wisconsin is now back in it because of their blowout win. And I don't understand how Paul Chryst, and this is a defensive team, how Paul Chryst gets jettisoned and somehow that wakes up Graham Mertz. I mean, is that what's been holding back Paul Chryst? Graham Mertz is Paul Chryst. I mean, I don't know. It's the game of his life. Now maybe that's one game. It happens when a coach is fired, but that becomes an interesting team to keep an eye on now if they can rally and Mertz actually plays the way that everybody's been waiting for him to play all these years.
Well, a lot of that will probably have to do with how well the players wrap their arms around Jim Leonhard, who I understand they really, really like. Now,
yes,
you could have had a situation with Mertz and other players in the team that just flat out did not get on the same page with Paul Chryst. And to them, his departure was welcome. And it looked a little bit that way in that performance last week. But you look at this, you're talking about this West Division here, from the team that's on top to the team that's on the bottom of this division, they're only separated by one game. By one game. This division is wide open to anybody inside that. Iowa, the last place team in the division. Come on, give me a break. You know what I mean? So I think that anything can happen in the West. You talked about the East. Ohio State, obviously, I think the team to beat. Michigan might argue with you about that, but we'll see what happens when they meet later on in the season here. The other team that I would call a surprise, a little bit of a surprise this year, might be the Maryland Terrapins. I didn't expect this much from them with Tagovailoa, the quarterback. I always thought he was like in his brother's shadow in his shoes. I'm not a big Mike Locksley fan, but you look up and my goodness, this team is 4-2 all of a sudden, and being competitive. So I got to give them their kudos here. They'll make themselves into a pretty nice bowl game this year, and obviously, the most disappointing team in the entire conference has to be Michigan State.
Yeah,
has to be. I mean. I'm sure the regents at Michigan State are not sleeping well at night, knowing that they signed that contract for Mel Tucker, which was ludicrous. Just a knee-jerk reaction. You know what a lot of it was, Greg? A lot of it was not only knee-jerking to what was happening, but also because they were just coming out of all that sexual scandal bullshit that was happening there, and they wanted to paint a different image, okay? Here's a minority hire, all these good things. We're doing the right things here at the school. And it ended up being a terrible decision on their part.
Yeah, so far. And it's a long season, or at least another half a season to go. So they've got to get something rolling to get some positivity because the recruiting, from what I hear, is okay. So we'll see, because recruiting matters, and maybe he gets one last season, next season, to try and save his reputation there and a lot of money for the university. All right, so who are you going to go with? Because I'm sticking with Ohio State, and in the West, I said Minnesota was going to be my backup, and for Nebraska, and even though Nebraska's 2-1. I don't believe in them anymore. So I'm going with Minnesota as the West champ. And the big game this week we'll talk about later on with Illinois.
Well, you've got two teams inside the West Division that rank number 1 and number 2 in the country in overall total team defense, which is pretty strong. And they're going to meet each other this week, Minnesota and Iowa. If Iowa...
Illinois, you mean?
Illinois. Yeah, I'm sorry. Illinois and Minnesota. So between those two, whoever wins this game will put themselves into the driver's seat. As far as Iowa is concerned, they're always a rock-solid defense.
Sure.
And Kirk Ferentz, as we mentioned before, he needs to fire his son. This offense is pathetic. Just absolutely. It gets worse by the week instead of better by the week. And we saw signs of it the first two games of the season when they couldn't score a touchdown in either of their first two games of the season.
Yep.
And then they enter in a Big Ten play. It's almost an embarrassment to Kirk Ferentz. They need to make that change at Iowa.
Yeah. Interesting because it's. I've been bashing as a Rutgers fan. I do that show for Rutgers, and I've done nothing but talk about how humiliated I am as a fan to watch the quarterbacks that they've been throwing out there for a Big Ten school. And you could say the same thing at Iowa. You could say the same. There are a few other programs you can say that. And this is why I love the transfer portal. Because you take a look at Kansas. Their quarterback has a great start to the season. He's talk of the town. He gets hurt. The backup comes in, throws 4 touchdown passes. All right, well, he's good. And then you take a look at what happened with TCU, the quarterback Duggan. He was the backup when the season started. You take a look at, there's a few other examples. Texas Tech. Third string quarterback played last week at Oklahoma State. They almost won. He had a fantastic game. So there are these second string, third string quarterbacks all sprinkled around the country that are much better than what a Rutgers or an Iowa or other teams that are in the same. San Diego State is miserable at quarterback. So you would think that with the transfer portal that you have, that those schools would be able to go out and, okay, we'll take you as a third string and put you on our first string. So, but it's not going to help those programs this season.
No, and the truth of the matter is while portals help, you still need to do the recruiting. You still need to
that's first, number one.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. You have to bring in recruits yourself that were pedigree quarterbacks that you wanted at your program. If they don't pan out and they transfer out, that's when you begin to push the panic button a little bit and you go out and raid the transfer portal. But it's so vital. I know the world knows that the number one starting point for winning football games is the quarterback on every team, every level.
Yep.
And, if you don't get that quarterback play, you're just not going to win football games. So we're seeing some good quarterback play in the Big Ten, not as much as I think we've seen before in the past, which might lead to the mediocrity a little bit in the West division. But, in the East, we've still got, Michigan. The two Michigan quarterbacks are both good quarterbacks. The Ohio State quarterback is right there as well. So, who's going to win that division? The team with the best quarterback. That's C.J. Stroud from the Buckeyes.
Yes, and here's the thing with McCaffrey at Michigan is first 300-yard passing game last week is that, and this is going to be interesting because we talked about the transformation from the spread to more of a power run offense last year, conservative, let's win on defense, then to, okay, well, if we're really going to beat the big teams in the playoffs, we have to have a more multi-dimensional quarterback like McCaffrey. He can make them more dangerous. Okay, now he's just started a few games, but I haven't seen what I think they're capable of. They have, in my opinion, they are loaded at wide receiver. They got one explosive running back and another really good backup. Okay, run the ball. Nice, no problem. But you've got to, at some point this season, start opening it up because they're still doing a little bit too much of the run, pass kind of thing. And at some point, I think they need to take the training wheels off McCaffrey. And, hey, if he's going to make a mistake here or two, let him. But I think they're too explosive potentially on offense in the passing game to be settling week in and week out in running the football and playing a defensive type of game. This is not last year's Michigan. I think this is a different team. Whether or not that happens, I think it's going to determine whether or not they have what it takes to beat Ohio State and go on and possibly win a playoff game this season.
Probably a twofold situation for Harbaugh here, with not only the two-headed quarterback, but pretty strong at the running back position as well. So if he doesn't get what he wants out of the quarterback, he reverts to the running game. And it's sort of like, we're devising our playbook, our game plan by the game, by the result, by the week. and eventually that's going to blow up on you. And whether it happens between now and the Ohio State game remains to be seen. But again, I'm not a big Jim Harbaugh fan. I know he does a nice job recruiting. Their defense is rock solid, but I think sooner or later Jim Harbaugh will beat Jim Harbaugh.
Let's move on now to the ACC, and Clemson is in a really good position if they can knock off Florida State. This is pretty much it. If they can knock off, because they do play Syracuse next week, but that's still, it's not to be seen whether Syracuse can play with the big boys. So this is the big one for Clemson, and because if they lose, now all of a sudden you've kind of opened up a little bit of a door, just a little bit of a door for Syracuse, NC State, and Wake Forest. Florida State really doesn't. This is Florida State's season. They've got. They do have Miami on schedule. They do have Florida on schedule, but this is still the biggest one because they Miami. I know it's a rivalry, but they can win, lose, whatever. I think the Florida game might actually be even more important because that's an SEC team. They haven't beaten them and so forth. But this is it. This is the kind of game that Florida State needs to look next year in the offseason and go, yes, we made a major step up. We won X amount of games, we went to a bowl, and we beat. And it has to be, I think, this. Now, I'm not picking them. I'm actually taking Clemson. But as far as the rest of the teams, they don't have a chance if Clemson beats Florida State this week.
Well, if Florida State beats Clemson and the other way around, it's still not going to put Florida State in any kind of a position in the Atlantic. They'll still be a game behind Clemson.
Yep.
And who knows what Syracuse does in their game against NC State. So they're going to be trailing them as well. So even if they lose, that's only the first loss for Syracuse inside the conference, whereas Florida State has 2. So Florida State's got a lot of uphill climbing to do. I think they've had a much improved football season here. Mike Norvell is finally getting his players into position and capitalizing because of it. But they still got a long way to go to prove that they belong on the same field with Clemson. And I don't think we'll see that this week.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to blame the coordinator or the quarterback, whose fault it was, but to throw an interception at that point in the game when you have a pretty decent field goal set up already to win the game.
Yes.
Not tie it, to win the game. And then you throw an interception, it's just mind-boggling. It's just not good.
No, it's the kind of stuff that keeps you're up at night. That and another topic which we'll get onto maybe at some point later on down the football road. But it's the head coaching decisions that are being made today. They're absolutely mind blowing.
Yeah.
So you talk about decisions to win football games. A lot of those are falling on the coaches, and they're not making the right decisions.
I think right now, from what I've seen, I think what we saw the Clemson Wake Forest overtime game, I think is definitely all I need to know about what we've seen this year from Wake Forest. I really believe those are the two best teams, Wake Forest and Clemson. And Clemson is just going to be a better team because they play defense, and Wake just doesn't play the defensive type of game. But again, if Clemson loses this week, everybody's tied, more than likely. It's possible that you could have a 2 or 3 game tie. And then we'll see how things take care of the rest of the way. And the Coastal, as usual, still kind of wide open. And all of a sudden, Georgia Tech.
Who?
Yeah, Georgia Tech is actually in the Coastal race after firing Jeff Collins. They've won the last 2 games. They look like a completely different team, which is just weird. I don't know what's going on there. I'll have to find out if they keep winning games. But, Miami's been the big disappointment. I thought it was so funny last week before the North Carolina game. I was reading some articles about how, like, Mario Cristobal had to explain why he was going back to Van Dyke after benching him in the loss to Middle Tennessee State the game before. It's like, why is this a discussion on whether Van Dyke's playing? This kid's got the talent to be a potential first-round draft pick, and he has a bad week with bad receivers, by the way, so it's not all his fault. And you're putting all the blame on him? Like, he needs to now take the seat? I mean, I don't know what that was about. He played a little bit better. The team played a little bit better, but still lost to North Carolina. They're still a very disappointing team right now, and I don't know, maybe Pitt could still be the team to beat when it's all said and done. North Carolina, though, is on top at the only undefeated team in the Coastal.
Yep, Mac Brown still alive in the races because he's got an offense, not much of a defense, but he can outscore you on any given day. And I'm going to agree with you on Miami of Florida being the most disappointing team in the conference. Virginia might have got a little bit of a vote there too
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well. You know, with Brennan Armstrong being back in, no offense at all. This team has gone completely backwards offensively.
By the way, you want to talk about, why coaching matters. So they take the offensive coordinator, goes from Virginia to Syracuse.
Yep.
And look what happens to Syracuse and their offense this year. And look what's going on at Virginia. Now, look, understand what's going on. They hired the new coach who was an offensive coordinator with Clemson. So I get that. But that switch for Armstrong's sake, I mean, he's the one that really is the injured party here because he lost the coordinator that made him look like a top quarterback, and now he looks like one of the worst quarterbacks in the conference.
You know, he looks lost because the offense is not centered around him. Primary reason. But I'm gonna throw my 2 cents in here on Miami of Florida and Tyler Van Dyke. I don't usually watch a lot of college football games from start to finish in depth, but I did last week's game because I'm down here in Miami. I wanted to see the Canes, and the Canes were in a bad situation to bounce back after laying a bad egg as a 20-point favorite and losing the game before, to see them blow again, and they did. But in watching the game, the thing that jumped off to me off the page is Tyler Van Dyke is not a very good quarterback. Okay? He alone, okay, could have brought that team back and didn't. His passes were sailing over wide receivers' heads by 5 and 6 feet. He's not right. He's not the same quarterback that we saw last year.
I think it's a coaching change too. I don't think he fits the offense of Josh Gaddis.
I don't think he does at all. And you've also got, like you mentioned, some wide receivers that really aren't up to speed or up to par for where they should be at this level of a football program. But I mean, he had so many opportunities at the end of the football game to pull a victory out, and he just choked. He just he
doesn't look right. Yeah, he's not comfortable.
No, he's not at all. So, now when it clicks and he gets there, you can look for Miami to go on a little bit of a run because he will then have found his rhythm. So watch out for that. If he has that one good game, that could be a springboard for Miami moving forward.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You bring in these guys. He's a Broyles Award winner, and you think everything's going to be okay. But if the quarterback doesn't fit the system, it's just you see the results. Because Van Dyke last year looks 10 times better than he looks this year.
Oh, he entered this year in the Heisman Trophy race.
Yes.
One of the quarterback candidates, right? Yes. Exactly.
Louisville's also been a little bit disappointing. And they're back to being 500. They did win last week without Cunningham, which was huge. It's probably saved their season. But, I think they just expected maybe Satterfield to push this program to where maybe you see NC State and even eventually Clemson. But that's just not happening.
No, and as a result, he ends up being on the coach's hot seat here right now, does Satterfield, and rightfully so. I mean, it's been now 3 years now. A lot more has been expected what he's delivered with this football program here, and you're talking about a team in Louisville that there were some high hopes for in the beginning of the football season. They're sitting in last place in the Atlantic Division inside the ACC. So there's no excuses here. He's got to start winning football games or he'll be out on the unemployment line as well.
Big game this week. Rivals, North Carolina, Duke. So that could have a lot to say what's going on in the Coastal. Give me your pick in the Coastal.
This is a real wide open. If I told you Georgia Tech, you better get to a doctor right away.
Okay, you never know. You never know.
No.
It's the Coastal. Stranger things have happened.
It is. I'm not going to use Pittsburgh because they won last year, and they could be a little bit semi-tired. I'm going to go with Mac Brown. I think he's got the little mojo going there right now. I'm not keen about the defense, but he can light the scoreboard up, so I'm going to ride with Mac the Knife.
Yeah, I'm very surprised that they just, I don't know, it's all offense. I mean, and he's lucky he's got that Shoop coordinator who's done a tremendous job. He's not going to stay there very long. Unless Mac Brown says, I'm going to be here for 5 or 6 more years, I could see Shoop then saying, all right, I'm not waiting 5 or 6 years. Because he should get a head coaching gig next year. But if Mac Brown says, I'm only going to be here for a couple more years, then I can see Shoop hanging around, becoming the next head coach in North Carolina. But
hey, Craig, I got news for you. Okay, Mac Brown will be happy just to say he's on this earth in 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, so that's not surprising. All right, let's move on to the Big 12. And again, we said this in the preseason that this could be a wide open race. We said that it could be teams playing in the championship game with more than one loss, and I'm not going to change from that. I still think we're going to have at least one team potentially in the championship game with 2 losses. It's just too competitive. And now all these teams are still yet to play each other. So you get all these teams nobody's good enough to run the table. They're just not. So I think this is going to be a lot of fun watching these Big 12 games over the next month and a half.
Look at the standings from top to bottom here, Greg. You see the top 3 teams: Kansas State, Oak State, TCU, all undefeated. Okay, having a real nice season, 7-0 combined. Look at the bottom 3 teams: West Virginia, Iowa State, Oklahoma, combined 0-8 on the season.
Yeah, Oklahoma and Iowa State.
Are you kidding?
In the Big 12 championship game last year.
Yeah, and they're both sitting in the cellar this particular football season.
And they could both win 3 straight. So you just don't know what's going to happen. So
this is the conference. It's much like the NFL used to be labeled on any given Sunday. In the Big 12, it's on any given Saturday.
And we picked Kansas State as the nice sleeper, and so we're not changing our mind now, especially that Adrian Martinez has woken up. He was just, I don't know what was going on there, but then since the Oklahoma game, things have been a lot better. TCU, we mentioned Duggan. I got to tell you right now, and this is something we'll throw in there as well. I would put him in the Heisman candidate conversation. That's how good he's been. Now he's got to be a guy like that at Kansas State. You can't lose though. He's going to probably have to go undefeated, which isn't going to happen. But another big chance this week because it's TCU and Oklahoma State. And I believe that's game day. I believe so.
I believe it is, although they did at Kansas last week. They did.
They did it last week, but I think it's Oklahoma State. I think so. I'll double check, but I think I heard it was going to be Oklahoma State TCU, but I'll double check.
Well, there's so many good games that they could have landed at this week anyway. But let me tell you a quick little sidebar story about Kansas State here. One of my real good friends who owned one of the largest offshore sports books in the world. We got to know him and some of the players and everybody down there. Well, he's from Philadelphia, and he knows the Eagles really rather quite well. And Jalen Reagor was the #1 draft pick by the Philadelphia Eagles and one of the biggest busts ever. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And Jalen Reagor blames Max Duggan for him having a poor year in his senior year in his final season at TCU. And that's why he didn't go #1, 2, or 3 in the draft. He was drafted in the later part of the first round.
Oh.
You talk about the egos of these football players here. Well, Jalen Reagor is barely hanging by the threads with a job in the National Football League these days. But he's got a finger point at people like Max Duggan to blame for where he's at today. It's just absolutely incredible.
Now you know why players fail.
Yes, exactly right.
That's why it is important to make sure you don't just draft players based on stats or talent. Where 40 times you got to sit down and have a conversation.
Yeah, they have to have something upstairs.
Are they going to be a team player and all that other stuff? By the way, game day, I should have realized it's actually going to be at Tennessee.
Oh, that's the place to be.
Alabama, Tennessee. Yep. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But anyway, the Oklahoma State TCU game is going to be huge because they're taking on right to potentially be in first place. Kansas State, meanwhile, who does Kansas State play this week? Do they play this week? No, they're off this week, I believe. Kansas State, right? They're off. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see them. And there's quite a few teams that are off this week.
Yeah, it's off. I've noticed that. Yeah.
Right, and will be next week as well. Right.
Who do you like? Championship game. You still like Kansas State, I'm assuming. Who else do you like?
Well, I do not. I can tell you the teams I do not like. I do not like Texas. Okay.
Really? Okay.
No, I'm not a Steve Sarkisian fan at all.
Neither am I.
I think a sleeper team might be Texas Tech. This football team is not going to yield to anybody.
Even with 2 losses, you still think they can come back? Okay. Well, they have to run the table at this point.
That means they'd have to run the table. Yeah. Exactly right. So I think they're a 2-loss team that has the potential to do just that. Amongst the other, you could say no losses for TCU, but I think they're going to take their first loss this week personally. Amongst the other 1-loss teams, that leaves the Baylor Bear, who's the defending champion. I don't think he's going to get back there again. So I think this thing is wide open, and I do see Kansas State playing Oklahoma State for the championship.
Wouldn't it be something if Just taking a look quickly at the schedule. Yeah, wouldn't it be something if the last game of the regular season you had Kansas State and Kansas for the right to go to the Big 12 championship game?
How sweet would that be, huh?
Wow, who would have
Yeah.
thought? Anyway, so let's move on to the Pac-12, and I think it's great what's going on with UCLA. I really do, and this is not a joke. They are for real. They are playing great football. And you know why they're playing great football? Because they have a veteran quarterback who's been with Chip Kelly now for what, four straight seasons since he was a freshman. So he knows the Chip Kelly offense, the back of his hand, and that's perfect. And then you have one of the top running backs in the country in Charbonneau. So you have a dynamic quarterback that is getting the job done. You have one of the best running backs, and they are just playing exciting, really disciplined, all around, big clutch plays when they need it type of football. And I think it's great. It's good for Chip Kelly. I'm not a Chip Kelly fan, or I'm not against him. I know he took a beating after he went into the NFL, and it was almost like he had become a joke for a while there. And even just a couple of years ago, he was still considered a joke while he was at UCLA. I think those are great stories, and I'm glad to see that he's kind of had a little rebirth. And next week, he will go back to Oregon in a major, major matchup between UCLA and Oregon, which is going to be great to see. And I know that one will not be on the Pac-12 network.
That will not be, no, that'll be on a major network.
Yeah, absolutely. They're not going to hide that one.
Right, that's where it'll be, exactly. You've got in this conference here, Greg, you've got the three teams you mentioned, Southern Cal, UCLA, and Oregon, all undefeated right now, and looking like two of those three teams are going to make it to the title game. There was a team up until last week that also, I thought, figured into the mix. It would have been the Washington Huskies.
Oh, what happened to them?
They look like they backpedaled a little bit here, Doesn't mean that they're not capable or dangerous.
Sure.
They're probably the type of team that neither UCLA, Southern Cal, or Oregon are want to meet somewhere down the road for anything at all. But I think it's got to be between those three teams.
Or Utah.
I'm going to rule out Utah, okay?
So you think USC beats them this week?
I think USC beats them this week. They've got that that big bullseye in their back from winning the Pac-12 championship last year. They're playing like it. They've got some major injury concerns right now, Utah does. I don't think they're even close to where they were last year. They could upset somebody in the final week of the season and ruin somebody's season, but I just don't think they're going to make it to the championship game this year.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I agree with that. I do like them against USC, but I do not think they're going to the championship game. No. I think it will be between those three undefeated teams. And if I had to pick a team, I have to pick it right now. See, it's just like we said with Kansas State, just for just the sake of whether you want to say tradition or just great college football. Unfortunately, it's not the last game of the season for either team, and I don't know why. I don't know why they changed that, because you have USC playing Notre Dame at the end of the season now. I don't know what that's about. I just don't. I don't understand why USC and UCLA are not playing at the end of the season. But whatever. When they play, second to last game of the season, that could very well determine who plays. And who knows? Maybe they could still, the loser may still be able to play and get redemption in a rematch. Because, again, there's no divisions. So it's the two best teams in the Pac-12 will face off in the championship game. And I'm not counting out Oregon, because they have really, how could they have not impressed you but with what they've done after getting just killed by Georgia week one, not even looking like they were prepared. It looked like it was going to be a long season. Even though we know how good Georgia was, it was still not good for Oregon. And yet they have done nothing but win since then. And most of the wins have been impressive.
Well, let's flip the script here, okay, and let's give them the win over Georgia, although it wasn't even remotely close. But let's just say in a fantasy world they beat Georgia to open the season, and now suddenly they're 6-0 along with UCLA and USC. Those would be three viable teams that we'd be talking about making the championship playoff game.
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah.
Not just the Pac-12, but the college football playoff championship game. So this Pac-12 is the most improved conference of all the Power Fives, head and shoulders above everybody else.
Yeah, they're still a year or two away before they can get back to one of these teams. And I hope Chip Kelly. See, the problem is Robinson will be gone, and Chip Kelly's got to start all over again. And that's with another quarterback, and Charbonneau will be gone. And that's so maybe there's a pinnacle, and then it's going to kind of rebuild. But with USC, you just know with Riley there, that's just a matter of time. Could be a year or two, but he will get USC back to where Pete Carroll had them. Now, whether or not he can win championships or not, I think he can because he's going to get talent there at USC he never could get at Oklahoma. But it's going to still take a few years.
Well, the difference being that he has the ability to get the talent, and he will get the talent, but the talent that he brings in here is going to be competing in the Pac-12, not in the Big 12. So he brings this talent in here. They're going to be far superior to other teams in the conference. Yeah. Hence, Lincoln Riley will rule the Pac-12.
Yeah. All right. Now let's. So who are your two teams?
I'm going to say USC and UCLA.
Okay, I can see that. I'm going to go ahead and say I'll say UCLA and Oregon.
Okay.
I say we'll get a rematch with next week's game in the championship game. Okay, now let's go to I'll tell you what, just quickly with the independents, because we're done with the Power Five, and let's talk about Notre Dame, and because that game last week, that was to me a very disappointing performance from BYU. Good going for Notre Dame though, because they were able to right the ship over the last couple of weeks after looking pretty bad early. But BYU, see, here's my take on BYU, is that I think every once in a while, especially when you get, call it lucky or not, or fortune, when you're able to get the quarterbacks that they've had there the last couple of shots with Zach and now with Hall, then you're going to win some games. But Kalani Sitake, who's been there for 7 years, to me, if you're trying to, and I know they're not going to make any decisions like I would, but if you're trying to be like a Boise State, you're trying to be like Cincinnati, you want to actually play like Notre Dame. You want to play with the big boys. You want to play and get to the playoffs. You are not doing it with Kalani Sitake. He's not that type of coach.
No, first of all, his name sounds like a mushroom, a bad mushroom,
Yeah.
And I was never a big Kalani Sitake fan, maybe even up until this year, because I thought he was a large cheerleader in the sideline. He kind of like was an Ed Ogeron kind of a coach to me. But I got to give him his due. He hasn't let the program drift south at all. He's kept them fluid, and he kept them relative.
Yep.
And we knew coming into the season he had the most experienced team of all the FBS teams this year. 4-2 in the season. 4-2 is a good year. Maybe in that regard, with all that experience, it's a little bit disappointing. And you surely would have loved to have seen that upset win over Notre Dame. That would have been the big feather in their cap. They then would have been the best independent football team we're talking about now, instead of Notre Dame. So, give him what it is. He is what he is. You'll end up being an 8-win team this year, and Kalani Sitake will be back for another year with the Mormons next year.
Yeah, it's sort of like when you're coaching an academy team. You don't have to have the aspirations the fans have. Oh, we want so much more. No, or like Stanford even with Shaw. Those types of schools are just content with, hey, if you can win games, and Sitake's won games and go to bowls every year and get that paycheck. Yeah, that's what they want. That's it. They're not looking for national. I mean, if they can get one, that's great. If they can get one every 20 years, they'd be happy if they get a playoff berth. But he's done what he needs to do to keep his job and bring him young. So, and then really nothing else in the independents except the fact that I do think you have to applaud so far what Jim Mora Jr.'s done at Connecticut. Not just because they get the win over Fresno, because that was a banged up Fresno team. But this is a banged-up Connecticut team. I mean, he's got loads of injuries. He just lost his running back again. He has his top 3 running backs gone out, who get the other running back at this year. But he's got his top 3 running backs back. His starting quarterback got hurt when the season began. I mean, he's had loads of injuries on a bad team, and they're one game under 500. So I think we all knew that was a great hire when the season began, but you know what? It looks like he might be getting that Connecticut program back on their feet, which is nice to see.
If they make it to a bowl game this year, Greg, you got to put him in coach of the year.
Absolutely.
I mean,
yes,
it's been a really, really nice turnaround for this program. They're no longer a doormat. They have to be respected. Now, maybe they're not quite there yet, but tip of the hat to Moore. I think he's done a great job this year. I agree.
American Athletic, AAC, and Cincinnati still looks like the team to beat, but you have Tulane, you have Central Florida, and then you have a few other teams that are all kind of beating each other up, or you would think will beat each other up. Uh, Look, it looks like Cincinnati. Yeah, they're going to more than likely be there again. Part of that, I think, is because some of these other teams have not at least made it interesting, like Tulsa or East Carolina. They've been a little bit disappointing too. But Tulane has been the one team with Willie Fritz, and it's been kind of disappointing to see what's gone on in the last couple of years because we were big Willie Fritz fans, and he did a really good job instantly when he got there. It's a nice little rebound season. This is another team, by the way, that lost its top two quarterbacks, went to their third string quarterback, and he led the comeback win or the big win. I believe it was over Houston and had a game-winning touchdown pass in overtime. That's just a great job. And what do you think? You think Tulane and Cincinnati in the championship game?
I think they're the two logical contenders right now. Yes, Central Florida is really, really capable. We know that. And they could end up being in the picture themselves. I don't know if in amongst those three teams how much of a round robin they have left of playing one another. That's going to probably be the biggest determining point of who will win or who will make it to the championship game amongst those three teams. But I would certainly be stunned if it's not Cincinnati, at least one of those three teams in the title game.
Yeah, Cincinnati will be at Central Florida in a couple of weeks, and they will host Tulane to end the season.
That'll be a big game. Yes.
So yeah, I'm probably going to go that way. I'll probably go because East Carolina, I think, with two losses early, I think they just they have some road games that'll be tough in the division in the conference. I think it's going to be tough now. So yeah, maybe we'll see Tulane because that, and I hate to see that if it is Cincinnati Tulane because they may play each other in back-to-back weeks. You never want to really see that. So
no.
All right, next up, the
disappointing team.
What's that?
Most disappointing team.
Oh yeah, most disappointing team would to me right off the bat it very well could be East Carolina. I'm not going to say Tulsa, so I'll say East Carolina, or I might even say South Florida because South Florida, I expected a little bit more from them, but they've either gotten blown out or they've almost beaten Cincinnati and Florida. So I'm not sure what's going on there.
Well, you're thinking more of them from a point spread standpoint where they were supposed to be much, much better this year. But I think my most disappointing team to me is easy. It's the Houston Cougars, who continue each and every year to keep underachieving under Dina Holgerson. And you mark this down. If this team does not finish with a winning record this year, and they're only 500 right now, if they don't, he's gone. He signed that big contract, and that big contract was based incentively on getting Houston into the Big 12 conference, which they've done. So he got that bonus, okay? But here's a coach who got that bonus and all that money who could be gone before they even make it to the Big 12 if he doesn't get his act together.
Yeah, they're the worst team in college football in penalties. That just shows you how undisciplined they are, and they've been pretty much at that point all season. Yeah. They should be 0-2 in the conference. They won last week. Handed to them, made the comeback, but they did it because they got the onside kick at the end of the game. All right, now let's go to the Sun Belt. And the Sun Belt has been a really nice they have just progressed and progressed and progressed, and they just keep getting better and better and better as a conference. And this is even – we both like Coastal Carolina when the season began, and they're undefeated. They're going to lose because Grayson McCall just can't keep bailing them out late in these close games. Sooner or later, they're going to lose. But in this division is so tough too that you think that you're going to still get maybe some teams beating each other. You got James Madison, Coastal, Old Dominion, even Georgia State's not out of it. And App State's got 2 losses already in the conference and the division. So, but I think it's still down maybe to those, it could be still down to those top 2 teams, Coastal and James Madison. I think James Madison is just a little bit better right now.
Well, the new kids in the block, they're really outperforming everybody's expectations. I was really expecting this, honestly, because of where they came from and also the fire in their eyes having made it this far. I think they're going to struggle a little bit this week against Georgia Southern. I'll talk a little bit about that later on in the show. But what you've got in this conference here, they are the fun in the sun guys. There's a lot of good football that's being played here right now. They've expanded. They feel like they have extra muscle in what it is they're doing here. App State, one of the best teams in the conference, has got a losing record. Go figure that out, okay? Or I should say they're 3-3. They don't have a winning record.
In the conference, a losing record. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Crazy.
So, they're a little bit of a disappointment because so much was expected from the football program here. Marshall's a big disappointment. They came into the Sun Belt Conference and they've really underachieved. They have lost both of their Sun Belt games.
And they beat Notre Dame.
Yes, they did. And that might have been their undoing. Doing something just like that. All of a sudden you think you're somebody you're not. On the other side, you've got a little bit going on there. Louisiana Lafayette way down this year, but they do dispose of Marshall on Wednesday night. So kudos to them. They could end up rebounding back that way. And South Alabama, everybody's got them in the championship game, if for no other reason. It appears to me that the West is the lesser.
Yeah, we talked about that in the beginning of the season. Yeah,
exactly right. Exactly. But they do stand out, those
South
Alabama.
I like Troy, too. I mean, Troy has impressed me this year. I don't know if they'll keep that up, but South Alabama does seem to be. And remember, they almost beat UCLA. So it's not a surprise. They've played really good football. So, yeah, so they do look like they stand out. So who do you think? You're going to go with James Madison and South Alabama?
No, I'm going to run with Coastal Carolina.
I like it.
Yeah, and South Alabama.
By the way, Coastal and James Madison will play the final game of the regular season at James Madison.
Oh, boy. That Coastal's got to go in there and win a game if they want to make it to the championship game. Yeah. That could be tough.
Hey, my boy Grayson McCall, the spotlight will be on. I wouldn't want to be James Madison.
Yeah, that would really have to be a must-watch football game. I got to say that. I look forward to that for sure.
Yep. All right, Conference USA. And it's kind of last year UTSA was exciting and everything. We really got behind them and that was great. And they're the king of the conference once again at this point. But we still have a long way to go. I just don't trust UAB. I think we've seen that already. They'll still win games, but I don't think they're capable without Clark of getting to the championship game. I've been touting Bloomfield at Rice for a couple of years now, and it's happened. So they've finally started. It's sad the way they have to play like in front of 5,000 people in that stadium, and I get it. It's Rice football. I don't know if they can keep this up the whole season. I didn't predict them to be in the championship game, but it does look like still UTSA is the team to beat.
I think they are the team to beat until they're beat. That maybe not quite as good as they've been in the past, but still, I think the best team inside this conference here. North Texas is showing a little bit of moxie right now. But you look at the overall win-loss records of every team in the conference, nobody stands out. I mean, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I think UTSA is the only one in this conference that has a winning record. Maybe Rice?
Overall. Rice and UAB.
UAB. Okay, there you go. So not a lot of winning per se inside this conference, but a lot of what I would call parity inside this conference here. And I think UTSA, until proven otherwise, is indeed the team to beat.
Yeah, and I mean, North Texas, I think they might be able to – they could get there, the championship game. I don't think they'll win it, but I think they could get there. I think if Rice is going to actually be for real, I think they have to win this week, which I think is possible, at Florida Atlantic. They have to really prove themselves on the road. But Western Kentucky, maybe we get a rematch from last year's championship.
There's the sleeper team, Western Kentucky, that everybody kind of wanted to trash because Bailey Zappi was gone. Yeah. Everything they did, all those records they set. But, my goodness, give this team their due. They're playing some really good football here right now. And at 500 in the season here, they'll make a push to become a winning team by the end of the year.
2 more to go. First, let's take a look at the Mountain West. And in the Mountain West, in the Mountain, Boise is the team at top of the division, even though their coordinator was fired, their quarterback transferred and basically quit. Utah State, of course, Bonner, the quarterback, out for the year with the injury, so that's big. Even though the backup actually won the bowl game and played last week and helped with their upset win over Air Force. So we know how good a coach Anderson is, so they're not going to go away. Air Force, I think, might be a little bit overrated. They've had some games where they don't look as good as we thought they were going to be. But I'm still not totally sold on Boise. It's their defense that's riding them. They don't have much. They have a running back, Kalani, and that's it. They don't have a passing game. It's defense and the run game, which might do it in the Mountain. So, yeah, I think Boise maybe. I don't know if there's another team that can possibly compete with them. Maybe it's Utah State.
Well, what's the most surprising thing to me about this conference in the Mountain Division is the worst team is sitting up tied for the top of the division. That's Colorado State.
Yeah. Oh, jeez.
My goodness. I mean,
Ugh.
1-4 in the season. Their only win was their last game, and they're not going anywhere. Believe me, they're pathetic. So it's by default who gets up there. I think Air Force, I think, is going to push their way and drive themselves to press Boise State, who's really a little bit of an enigma this football season here. They look sometimes good and sometimes really bad. I don't think there's a lot to like inside this Mountain Division, inside this conference here, and I think that's the weaker of the two divisions.
And in the West, you have San Jose State, who it's nice to see that they're back. They had a little bit of a maybe it was a championship kind of deal where they won the championship, and then last year maybe everybody was after them. But they're back to playing the kind of football that they played a couple of years ago. Brennan's done a fantastic job there. Love and look, talked about a potential sleeper in the beginning of the season with Arroyo at UNLV, and it's happening. But if they're for real, then they're going to have to prove it this week against Air Force. San Diego State, like I said before, their quarterback situation is so bad, it makes Rutgers' quarterback situation look good. So they're not going to go very far. They were lucky to beat Hawaii last week. Lucky. And Fresno, unfortunately, I don't know how much longer they have to wait for Hainer to come back. I just don't think he's going to come back in time. So San Jose State, they look like the team right now that looks to be clearly the best team in the West. And matter of fact, I think they're right now the best team in the entire conference.
Well, they could arguably be just that. I don't think by season's end they will be, because I think the team they're going to play for the championship out of the West is going to ultimately end up being that team. And I think that team will be Air Force.
Oh, okay.
By the time push comes to shove.
You believe in Air Force?
I believe in the Air Force, yes. I do believe in the Air Force. When they're good, they're really good. And they've had a couple of slop bucket games, but I think overall they have the most talent inside the conference. And I look for them to take on San Jose for the marbles in the Mountain West.
All right. And in the MAC, everybody's favorite conference, they'll be starting to play those weekday games soon. So in the East, Buffalo. I mean, when the season began, they looked as bad as any team in the MAC. They just didn't look good. But all of a sudden, they've had a few breaks along the way, and it's opened things up. And now they're at the top. One of the breaks is having Miami's quarterback out for the year. So that's majorly damaging. Kent State is still a team that has potential. Unfortunately, they lost to Miami last week, and that was a tough loss for Kent State. And now they're going to play Toledo this week. So I don't know. I think Buffalo might end up they're already 3-0. So they might be in a really good situation to hold on in the East.
Well, they could do just that. The problem is the East is the least when it comes to these two divisions, and the West isn't all that good.
It's the MAC.
This conference is way down this year, Greg.
Yeah.
I mean, way, way down. Who comes out of the East on top here? I think it's a coin flip. I really do. You mentioned Kent State. They had the ability. But,
by the way, Buffalo, Kent State will play final game of the regular season in Buffalo.
I'll go so far as to say the winner of that game will be in the MAC title game representing the East.
And in the West, it looks like it's Toledo's at the top, but I think Eastern Michigan's got a shot, because the last couple of weeks, a couple of weeks ago, after the Arizona State game, they had that letdown, embarrassing. Well, it was kind of an embarrassing defensive performance, but they just were flat in a way when they got beat up by Buffalo. It was a high-scoring 55-35 game. Then they had an ugly slugfest, low-scoring affair with UMass. So they had two bad games in a row, but the quarterback was not around. And I think the letdown from the Arizona State game hurt them in the Buffalo game. Not having their quarterback hurt them in that game against UMass. But then Powell came back last week, and they upset Western Michigan on the road. He's back, and I still think Eastern Michigan has a chance, but Toledo does seem to be the clear team to beat.
Well, you hit it right on the head about Eastern Michigan. They and Toledo are the only two teams in the MAC conference with winning records this year. Toledo looks to be the superior team amongst all the teams, and I think they're going to be very, very difficult to beat because you build with momentum a lot in the MAC conference, and I don't see anybody that's mediocre or worse tripping up a Toledo football team from here on out. So, has Toledo played Eastern Michigan yet this year? And if
No,
they
they're going to
no,
play in a few weeks.
okay, well then that will probably decide the winner of the West. And the winner of that game will most likely then be in the MAC Conference Championship game and win the MAC Conference Championship. So keep an eye out for that Toledo Eastern Michigan game. That will be huge.
Yeah, Ball State. It was not. It was really. Their back-to-back wins were pretty impressive because they had that overtime win, which was really wild game against Northern Illinois, and they followed that up by winning on the road against Central Michigan. So maybe they got something going on at Ball State. We'll keep an eye there. Mike New, he really needs a big season too there to prove that he still belongs there as head coach. But kind of disappointing at what's going on majorly with Central Michigan and Northern Illinois this season.
Yeah, I mean,
Jim McElwain at Central Michigan, and Northern Illinois lost Rocky Lombardi a month ago, and that's definitely hurt him a little.
Yeah, this MAC is way down. Jim McElwain's football teams are usually good. They're not this year. And it's not that they're not good because everybody else is better. It's just they're flat out not good. This is a conference that come bowl season here, the winner of this conference might be the only team in a bowl game. I'm going to go maybe so far as to say that.
All right. Before we move on and go over the games this week, futures, and we're not going to, there's no time to change now, especially because Bryce Young, we think he's going to be okay. So we're still going to go with Alabama winning the championship this season.
I've got Alabama winning the championship this season, yes. Even if they stub their toe somewhere down the road.
They'll go to the playoffs.
Yeah, they'll go to the playoffs. And if they get to the playoffs, that's all they need. Just open the door and let them in.
Yeah.
And they'll take care of business from that point forward. They're probably better off to stub their toe before.
You're right, yeah.
The SEC championship and build the momentum moving forward. But they're indeed going to be the team to beat when the college football playoff rolls around.
And as far as if you had to pick let's not pick Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, or Clemson. Who would you go with?
Well, that's going to be difficult. Then that would mean to me that Michigan beats Ohio State, and then it has to be Michigan. If somebody beats those teams, Greg, any one of those four aforementioned teams you just talked about, and knocks them off to reclaim or claim their division, that could be the team that barges through. Michigan's got that possibility. I'm not saying that they're worthy.
Sure.
I'm saying they have that possibility to do something just like that. The Southeast Conference, it's always wide open, obviously, because of the talent within the conference here. But if Tennessee pulls the rug out on Alabama this week, okay, then that will have been a loss for Alabama and a scare for Alabama in the A&M game.
Yes.
And suddenly Alabama they're not Superman anymore. So that's a huge, huge factor here. And if Tennessee pulls that rug, then I think it just completely apple carts the whole playoff picture here. So if it's not any one of those four football teams, it probably can't be anybody out of the SEC because you've got two teams already in there. You're not going to have a third here, obviously.
No.
So I would say the other team that could barge through might be Southern Cal out of the Pac-12.
The way I'm looking at covers, and I'm looking at their futures, and I've never seen it like this before. So they have, like, if a team is plus 3,000, is that 30 to 1?
No, that would be plus 300 to 1.
Yeah, because that's I can't be right then. That's why I'm confused about. I've never seen it like this before. It says Alabama's plus 200, Clemson is plus 1,200, which I'm taking is 12 to 1.
So in the Alabama plus 200, if you excuse me, if you put up 100, you win 200.
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah.
Right.
So it has to be okay. So yeah, so Michigan surprisingly is 30 to 1.
Yes,
that's surprising.
Yes,
that they're 30 to 1. That's a good value.
Yes,
they have Tennessee at 100 to 1.
There's good value there too. I mean, it's all coming before the Alabama game.
Yes.
And Michigan before the Ohio State game here naturally. But that's when you want to get in on these long shot puppies is the Tennessees of the world, because before they upset Alabama, you're going to hold on a big ticket, a big price. If they don't win the game, you can tear the ticket up. But if you're going to roll the dice, you do it now with the Tennessee football team.
Yeah. Of course, you're not going to get a big money line on Tennessee, Alabama this week.
No.
So you might as well, if you were thinking about it, you might as well just put it on them to win the national championship. Because if they win this week, then they have a serious chance of potentially making some noise.
Yeah, they'd have to beat Georgia to get there, but nonetheless, they'd have a chance. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, Oregon, Oklahoma State are 40-1. UCLA's 100-1. Penn State's 60-1. Ole Miss is 60-1. I don't know why Texas A&M is still 25-1. I mean, they're
Come
not
on.
going anywhere.
Wow.
They should be 5,000-1. I mean,
Yeah,
there's no chance for Texas A&M to go to the playoffs with 3 losses already.